Hi, welcome to the bathtub. This is Scott Bradfield, or known as the Old Masturbator. We masturbate in the morning, we masturbate in the evening, we masturbate all over this town. That's how the song goes, and we live up to those lyrics. Today, I'm kind of falling behind. I got all these different things I've been reading for several weeks, and I never got around to taping any of these really poorly produced chats. And today, one of the many ones I'm going to try to do the next day or two is one about Colin Wilson's The Mind Parasites. This is the sort of sequel to our previous talk about Colin Wilson, which is about the novel of ideas, however wacky. And I would definitely say that Colin Wilson writes genuine novels of ideas, but they're completely wacky. He's a really weird guy. And he wrote. I had never really read his fiction. I knew Colin Wilson because I really enjoyed his nonfiction when I was really young. For one reason, because he would describe all these different philosophers who I couldn't understand if I read Sartre or anybody like that. And he would explain them in like 20 pages, so I at least could understand something about people like Sartre or Maslow or the various writers and philosophers he would talk about. His most famous book is probably his first book. It's basically literary philosophy called The Outsider. It was published in the mid-50s, early 50s in England. He's a working class guy, I guess. I want to say he came from a really poor background. He was sort of self-educated. He didn't get into the good schools, I don't think. And he basically read and learned to write about them. He has kind of this omnivorous hunger for books, like many of our bathers out there. And he would read all sorts of stuff. And he kind of came up with sort of philosophies that were slightly influenced by existentialism. Basically the idea that, individuals had to make their own choices in life, and they couldn't count on all these philosophies and religions and things that were handed down to them, and or belief in good and evil and so forth. But they had to find their own way in the world, and that leads him to Wilson to one of the people who interests him most is the psychologist, I guess, Maslow, who believed in something called self-actualization, that we can go beyond our limits. Human beings are not confined by their generational or their naturalistic or their genetic material. We're not confined by ourselves. We have this ability to go beyond ourselves and become, and to self-actualize, to create ourselves. So this starts off with something like the Outsider, the idea that I reread this in the past couple of months and enjoyed it because he talks about all these different writers and he kind of puts them all into this kind of this argument that most artists feel like outsiders. They don't feel like they belong into the culture they're in. They feel confined by that culture. They find that it brings them down. It limits them. It prevents them from fulfilling themselves. And he talks about all sorts of writers, again, from Sartre's Nausea through Hermann Hesse is a big writer for him, and Hemingway. And again, he just talks about so many different writers and philosophers. And then as the book goes on, he says that there's a way out of, kind of a way beyond this limitation of the world where you feel like you don't belong in this society, and the way you can find your way back into it is through visionary experiences. So he talks about people like Huxley and Blake and so forth, and that self-actualization through visionary exploration of the universe. You're as a person, you're capable of these great feats of imagination that can help improve your culture and improve the world. That's a very simplistic description of it, but it's a fun read. The weird part about Colin Wilson is that he'll tie all these different characters together into this one kind of general philosophy. So he's written lots of nonfiction. One is this one, The Strength to Dream, which I haven't read, in which he talks a lot about H.P. Lovecraft, who he kind of dismisses a lot in his early career, and then later comes to like Lovecraft. But he kind of treats Lovecraft as if he's arguing all this stuff, and that somehow he has this connection to the universe. It's kind of weird. And then you'll have the occult, in which he goes in and looks at all these different experience, all these reports of occult life, so people who can read minds and people who can teleport, people who can do all this sort of stuff. And he basically takes everything at face value. He never really sort of criticized any of the ghosts and lots of paranormal. He wrote a lot of books about the paranormal, and he looks at it all into this lens that somehow human beings can do much better than we're told we can do. Anyway, that's a very quick way of just setting up for this book, which came out when I was a kid, The Mind Parasites. I must have bought this book when I was first buying science fiction books when I was like 14 or 15. And I just liked the cover. And I didn't know anything about Colin Wilson. And I just thought it was these cool old Bantam covers. and I liked the title, and I thought it was going to be kind of good. And I couldn't get into it when I was young, and I'd heard lots of bad things. Crisp, clear mountain water, no pixels, pure natural self-actualization here at the bathtub. All pure. And I'd always heard, it always got really bad reviews, particularly in science fiction press when I was a kid. I remember everyone sort of saying it was a kind of stupid book. But anyway, after reading The Philosopher's Stone, which we talked about maybe last year now, maybe a year ago, I thought I would try this because I'd heard a lot of people, when I did the talk on Wilson, say that this was actually a good book. And I went back to give it a try, and I quite enjoyed it. Again, I enjoyed it for many. I didn't like it as much as The Philosopher's Stone, but it had a lot of the same elements in it. And it's not really told in a novelistic way. It reminds me a little bit of H.G. Wells. It's more like a narrator describing these large historical sweep that he gets involved in. And he basically, he and a friend start to recognize that they feel like they're being constrained. Their lives feel repressed to some extent. And they decide that there's something called these mind parasites that exist somewhere in the universe, and that they're somehow sucking dry the human soul or human mental abilities. And as they start to recognize that there's these forces out there, they start to test their own, again, self-actualization abilities. So, for example, at one point, the narrator has a cigarette paper, and he sits around and thinks about how he can maybe move that cigarette paper around, and he floats it around a bit and so forth. And then that leads him to meet other people and to train other people. And it becomes this sort of fairly philosophical battle between this group of, I don't know what you'd call them. They're like free-loving, freewheeling intellectuals or something. And what happens is the mind parasites try to get back by forcing these people to kill themselves, to feel despair. They can actually make you feel despair. And so they ultimately they start to dig into the earth, and they find these remnants of these old civilizations. And I finished it a few weeks ago, and I've already forgotten a lot of it. But the battle, it starts to get even weirder and weirder as they move the cigarette papers around, and as they learn that they can actually, do these fantastic mental feats. They get more and more fantastic. And at one point, all of these, I don't know what you call them, these spiritual freedom fighters, get in a spaceship, and they fly off through the power of their minds, and they eventually find one of the arguments of the book is that the mind parasites aren't actually some alien race. They're actually the repressed id of human soul. There's the side of ourselves, this animal side that wants to hold us down to the earth, and the mind wants to go somewhere else. Anyway, it sounds ridiculous, and it is kind of ridiculous, but at the same time, I found it really absorbing and enjoyable. There's sort of crazy stuff. It's not his sense of the physical world and narrative. The narrative of the book is almost all just sort of philosophical. So you have very few scenes, very few dramatic scenes, and when they do come along, they're kind of ridiculous, I think. There's one where the president, so I forget who it is. Somebody blows up a city. I don't know who it's the mind parasites. They blow up some city, and the president's talking to these freedom fighters, and they decide, well, they're going to go off in a spaceship, I think, to fight these guys. And it sounds crazy, but it's sort of involving. And at one point he says, "Oh God, I forgot to tell the military. This town's been bombed, and the president is so busy talking to these guys, he forgot to tell them, the army, that they've been bombed." There's a lot of stuff like that in it, but for the most part, again, he doesn't write traditional novels. In the two I've read, there really are novels of ideas. They're novels that are driven by ideas, and they're quite absorbing and enjoyable. So I would, with those caveats in mind, I would recommend The Mind Parasites if you're interested. Kind of a philosophical take on Lovecraftian notion of the universe ruled over by a godless universe in which human mind can actually achieve godness qualities, if that's possible to say. Anyway, that's my quick take on him, and I'll probably read another. I enjoy reading his nonfiction and his fiction together, so I'll probably get back and do it again someday soon. Happy bathing. Oops, excuse me. I should self-actualize myself to the point where I don't belch. That's my new dream for the bathtub. Bye.